welcome back to our channel. The morning sun had barely pierced the horizon when Bill stirred in his sprawling estate, a sense of unease tugging at him like a warning he had chosen to ignore. For weeks, his energy had been faltering, fatigue gnawing at his limbs in subtle, insidious ways. His doctors had dismissed it as stress, overwork, and age. Yet deep in the pit of his stomach, a suspicion had begun to simmer, an unnameable dread that something unseen had been eroding his body from the inside out. It struck without warning. A sudden, violent pain tore through his chest, radiating to his jaw and shoulders, leaving him gasping for air. His vision blurred, a crimson haze filling the corners of his eyes. He collapsed onto the polished hardwood floor of his study, the papers and legal documents strewn around him like fragments of a life he no longer controlled. The room seemed to spin, the ornate chandeliers bending in his distorted perception, while the sound of his own heartbeat thundered like a drum of doom. Hayley stood at the doorway, her face a flawless mask of composure, though her mind raced with meticulous calculation. She had orchestrated this moment for weeks, administering a subtle, untraceable toxin, its effects delayed and insidious. Now, seeing Bill writhe in agony, she allowed herself a flicker of satisfaction, a brief, imperceptible triumph that no one else would ever know. She moved swiftly to the phone, her fingers gliding over the buttons with deceptive urgency, calling for medical assistance while simultaneously spinning the narrative she intended everyone to believe. Dani, she whispered internally, would take the fall. She could already imagine the headlines, the gossip, Dani's negligence leads to Bill's collapse. The thought sent a surge of vindictive pleasure through her chest. Meanwhile, Bill's mind fought against the haze of pain and dizziness. He was no stranger to control, to managing crises, but now he realized with bitter clarity that every strategy he had ever relied upon had failed. The very people he had trusted, Hayley most of all, had weaponized their closeness against him. As paramedics arrived, Hayley's subtle manipulations were already in motion. She guided the narrative with precision, emphasizing Dani's supposed oversights, her tone measured and persuasive, leaving little room for skepticism. Dani, for her part, was blindsided. When the news reached her, panic surged through her veins. She replayed every interaction with Bill, every contract, every minor misstep, searching for an explanation that could exonerate her. But the evidence was circumstantial, the timing convenient. She felt the walls closing in, her career, her reputation, every carefully built alliance threatened by a single act of calculated deceit. Rage bubbled beneath the surface, intermingled with fear, creating a tumult of emotion that left her paralyzed with indecision. Should she fight openly, risking exposure to Hayley's manipulations, or retreat quietly, sacrificing her credibility to preserve what little stability remained? Outside the estate, the ripple effects began. Derek, hearing of Bill's sudden stroke, felt unease twist into a gnawing suspicion. He remembered past encounters, the small, inexplicable inconsistencies in Hayley's behavior, her tendency to deflect and mislead. Yet the evidence pointed elsewhere, outwardly innocent, outwardly convincing. Naomi, too, received the fragmented news while preparing for her next modeling commitment. Her heart sank at the thought of another scandal, another betrayal in a world that already demanded perfection. Even Jacob, entangled in his own affairs, sensed the shift in energy, the silent tremor that suggested chaos was unfolding behind the polished facades of power and wealth. Inside, Bill's condition worsened. The paramedics worked with precision, but every movement sent spikes of pain through his body, each contraction of his heart a cruel reminder that the attack had been deliberate. His mind raced, seeking clarity amidst the haze of confusion and fear. He remembered the subtle inconsistencies in his medication, the faintly metallic aftertaste that had lingered over recent weeks, the orchestrated lapses in observation that now coalesced into a chilling pattern. It was no accident. Hayley had been patient, calculated, and utterly ruthless. Hayley, watching from a distance as Bill was loaded onto the stretcher, allowed a private smirk. She had covered her tracks meticulously, no fingerprints, no witnesses, only a trail of shadows pointing elsewhere. Dani would be blamed, Bill would never see the truth. And yet, beneath her practiced exterior, a flicker of unease gnawed at her. Power, she knew, was fleeting. Every deception carried within it the seed of exposure, and every act of betrayal could erupt in unforeseen ways. Dani, sitting alone in her office, felt her world collapse in slow motion. Each passing hour seemed to tighten the noose. She thought of her reputation, her integrity, her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of business and family obligations. And beneath all that, a personal fury burned, fury at Hayley's audacity, at Bill's vulnerability, and at the cruel irony that loyalty and competence were punished while deceit thrived. She considered confronting Hayley directly, exposing the poison, the lies, the manipulation, but the risk was immense. Every move had consequences, and one misstep could destroy her completely. Meanwhile, the hospital room was filled with a tense, almost palpable energy. Bill's condition teetered on the edge, his body fighting to recover, his mind a tempest of suspicion, fear, and barely controlled rage. Hayley hovered nearby, her performance flawless, yet every flicker of her eye betrayed the complexity of her calculations. She measured each statement, each glance, knowing that perception would become reality if she could guide it correctly. As hours turned into a day, the network of secrets, lies, and betrayals began to intertwine more tightly. Derek and Naomi, sensing that something darker was at play, began quietly sharing observations, piecing together fragments of truth that suggested Hayley's role extended far beyond simple manipulation. Jacob, restless and increasingly paranoid, began to question his own alliances, realizing that power could shift with a single revelation. Even Ashley, distant but connected through previous conflicts, felt the tremor of impending chaos. By evening, the storm had settled over the city, leaving a fragile calm. Bill lay exhausted, barely conscious, yet his mind remained active, reconstructing the threads of deception with painstaking clarity. Hayley's outward composure masked a simmering tension, the slightest mistake could unravel everything she had carefully constructed. Dani, despite her isolation and fear, began quietly plotting, knowing that patience, cunning, and timing were her only tools against the venomous assault on her life and career. In the stillness of the night, one truth became undeniable: betrayal had taken root, and the consequences would ripple outward, touching every corner of their lives. Trust had been destroyed, alliances tested, and each decision now carried weight far beyond its apparent scope. Power, deceit, and vengeance were all intertwined, and every character was trapped in a web of their own making. The following days promised only escalation. Hayley's calculated manipulation would be tested by unforeseen revelations. Bill's recovery would spark questions, doubts, and whispers that could not be silenced. Dani's fury and desperation would drive her to risk everything in pursuit of justice. And as the city slept, unaware of the tempest brewing in the shadows, one certainty remained: the fire of betrayal had been lit, and no one would escape its consuming heat. The storm outside mirrored the chaos inside Bill's life. In the sterile, whitewashed hospital room, he lay motionless, monitors beeping rhythmically like a countdown he could not control. His body had survived the initial strike, but the poison Hayley had carefully administered lingered in his veins, a slow-burning reminder of betrayal. Every twitch of pain, every shallow breath, was a testament to the cruel patience behind the scheme, calculated, invisible, and almost perfect. Hayley watched from a discreet distance, her expression carefully neutral, yet her mind raced with the thrill of manipulation. She had blamed Dani with subtle precision, planting seeds of doubt in convincing whispers that would shape every narrative. Dani, isolated and accused, felt the walls closing in, her every thought haunted by the knowledge that she was being framed for a crime she had not committed. Anger, fear, and frustration intertwined inside her like a living storm, each emotion pressing her closer to a breaking point. Outside the hospital room, whispers spread like wildfire. Friends, colleagues, and family exchanged theories, none aware of the truth but all sensing the gravity of the collapse. Derek's face was pale, concern and suspicion etched into his features as he observed Hayley's calculated movements. Naomi's instincts told her the situation was far from accidental. Jacob, tangled in his own past betrayals, could not escape the tension that seemed to infect everyone connected to Bill. The air felt thick, heavy with secrets and deception, and each person moved as if treading on a floor slick with invisible poison. Inside, Hayley's control was nearly absolute, yet the faintest hint of unease lingered at the edges of her mind. One misstep, one perceptive glance from Bill, could undo weeks of planning. Dani, however, refused to remain passive. Each heartbeat fueled her determination, sharpening her focus, forcing her to navigate a labyrinth of lies without stumbling. She knew exposing Hayley would require courage, cunning, and perfect timing. But the injustice burning inside her demanded action. Bill's eyes fluttered open briefly, the faintest recognition of danger flickering in his gaze. Somewhere beneath the haze of pain, a storm of anger, betrayal, and survival began to take shape. Hayley's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second as she realized her creation might not remain entirely under control. Outside, the world waited, unaware that this single act of poisoning had set in motion a chain of consequences that would ripple far beyond the confines of the hospital room. Trust had been shattered, alliances fractured, and every secret held the potential to erupt into chaos. As night fell, the room was suffused with a tense, fragile silence. The first cracks in Hayley's perfect narrative had begun to appear. Dani, fueled by determination and righteous fury, started planning her counterstrike, knowing that exposing the truth could restore justice, but also destroy everything in its path. Bill, still weakened but awakening to the reality of betrayal, sensed the storm that had only just begun. And Hayley, once untouchable, felt for the first time the precarious edge of control slipping beneath her fingers. The fire she had ignited with calculated cruelty was spreading, and no one could predict who would survive its heat.